Hello, I'm Dr. Diane Webster, and today's short story is a short vignette about life for 7-year-old Alice at Greenvale, Victoria in 1963. It's a work of fiction based on actual events. Names have been changed. Greenvale is 25 kilometres from Melbourne CBD. In 1963, it was a rural landscape with a few large farming properties and some smaller ones like Alice's house. Country life was simple back then, but often harsh, with many trials and tribulations for its inhabitants, as you'll see in our story. Listen to the very end and enjoy the tale. Sundays at Greenvale. 7:30 a.m. Sunday morning at home. "Can you go up the paddock and get the milk, Alice?" Mum said. "Yes, Mum," I replied, immediately getting up from the breakfast table and getting the milk pail and rummaging around in the kitchen drawers to find a plastic mixing bowl that would fit on my head. "What are you doing that for?" Mum asked. "There's a magpie in Uncle Ken's paddock that's been swooping me, and if I wear the mixing bowl, it can't peck my head," I replied. I was halfway up the paddock when I saw that the ram had spotted me. "Can I get to the fence before he starts charging at me? I know I can't run because that only makes him start off." So I walk a little more quickly and purposefully towards the wire fence while keeping my eyes directly on the ram. "Never turn your back on him, or he will charge for sure," I said to myself. I had just turned 7 in April this year, and I thought I was very grown up and responsible, getting the bucket of milk for our family from Uncle Ken's dairy each day. We lived on 10 acres of farmland that had been given to my father from his grandfather. He had sectioned off 10 acres from his large farm and given it to my father as a wedding present. We had some sheep, a ram, and some chickens, while my grandparents and uncle and aunt and their family lived just up the paddock on 1,000 acres, running a dairy farm and several feed crops. I made it through the wire fence, and then I knew that old ram with the gigantic horns couldn't get me. But now I was in the cow paddock, and there could be problems if the bull was in the paddock. He wasn't often in the paddock. Uncle Ken just put him in with the cows every now and then. I looked around to see if any of the cows had horns. That's the way to tell the bull from the cows. The cows never charged me, but not so with the bull. He was mean. Yes, unfortunately, he was in the cow paddock today and had not seen me, as he was on the other side of the paddock peacefully eating grass. I strode my way directly up the cow paddock, avoiding cow manure pats that seemed to be everywhere, and made my way to the dairy. The cows were all being milked, and it was quite noisy with the sound of the milking machine, the cows mooing, and the loud radio music. My Uncle Ken was there. He was always pleased to see me. "How are you, Alice? What are you doing today?" "I'm going to church with Granny in the morning, and then I might come up and practice some tennis against the practice board later this afternoon," I said. I loved Uncle Ken because he always was interested in me learning tennis and often would come over to the tennis court at the side of the big mansion and help me with my game. My grandparents lived in half of the big bluestone mansion called Dunhelen, and my uncle and aunt and cousins lived in the other half. I went to the big vat of milk and filled up my metal milk pail about 3/4 full. I wouldn't fill it too full, otherwise I might spill some on my walk back down the paddock to our house. Each way it was about 15 minutes walk, and once the aluminium pail was almost filled with milk, it was quite heavy. It must have been at least a half a gallon. With a nearly full pail of milk and the plastic mixing bowl on my head, I proceeded down the paddocks back home. I hadn't spotted the magpie on my way up, But as I was going back through the bull paddock, he came swooping down and banged hard on the top of my plastic bowl hat with his sharp beak. I've thwarted him, I thought. Ha ha, he didn't get me. That didn't hurt at all, just a bang on the mixing bowl. But oh no, while I was distracted with the magpie, the bull has seen me and is starting to move towards me with a determined stare. Will I get to the wire fence in time and get through the wires in safety without spilling the milk? Yes, through the fence I get back into our own paddock. Almost home, I'm thinking. Thank goodness, the ram is distracted now and far away from me on the other side of the paddock. I make it home with the pail of milk intact and no injuries. Now to get ready for church with Granny. Usually every Sunday, Granny and I walk up to the little Church of England church just up the hill from our home. Someone from the congregation always picks us up, so we never have to walk the whole way, which would be about half a mile. I'm wearing my best hat with pretty fabric roses and my best dress with a lovely bow. In fact, this is my only hat and my only good dress. Mum never comes to church now, since she says she has to prepare the roast dinner for lunch, which must be eaten every Sunday. Sunday would not be Sunday without our family roast dinner of a leg of lamb and roast potatoes, pumpkin and peas. Dad never goes to church. He doesn't believe, but he never tells anyone that. He says he's got work to do in the workshop and with the animals. My older brothers don't like going to church, so they stay home and go yabbying or picking mushrooms to sell at their little makeshift roadside stall. As Gran and I are walking along the old Sydney road up to the church, with wide brown paddocks on either side of the road, not a house to be seen, a car stops and Mrs. Suter is driving. "Would you like a lift, Eileen?" she says to Gran. "Oh yes, thanks so much, Jean," Gran replies. We are safely ensconced in Mrs. Suter's car when she says to Gran, "Did you see those boys earlier along the road selling mushrooms on Sunday? Well, I never. Surely their parents will put a stop to that. It's just not proper on Sundays. Don't you think, Eileen?" I think those were my grandsons, Jean. George and Jack." "Oh, I see. Well, it's just not right. That's what I think." No more was said about the matter, but I knew Granny felt embarrassed about my brothers indulging in commercial activities on Sunday. She would be having a word to my father, I was sure of it. The service droned on with readings and hymns. I liked it when they sung a hymn that I knew, but unfortunately Mrs. Suter always sang very loudly and very out of tune, so that spoiled it a little. Arriving home, the smell of the nearly ready roast dinner wafted into my nostrils, and I felt starving. We had to wait until we all sat down together at the kitchen table, and grace was said before we could eat our delicious Sunday roast dinner. During the afternoon, I took my younger brother, Charles, who was just 5 years old, up the paddock to practice some tennis. This consisted of hitting a tennis ball against the practice board at the far end of the big tennis court on my grandparents' property. Charles would usually entertain himself somewhere close by, around the farm, but I didn't take much notice of him. Uncle Ken turned up and gave me some tips about how to hold the racket better and gave me some words of encouragement. But he couldn't stay long as he was busy with his farm work today. About an hour later, Charles turned up crying, with blood running down his face and a large gash on his forehead. I knew Granny and Grandpa had gone out, and Uncle Ken was far away in one of the top paddocks. So I took Charles by the hand, and as quickly as possible, we headed down the 2 paddocks back to Mum at home. As we came through the kitchen door, Mum saw all the blood over Charles's face and clothes. "What happened?" Mum shouted in alarm. "The rooster pecked me," Charles said tearfully. Lucky Mum had been a nurse before she married Dad, so she always knew exactly what to do in cases like this. While Mum was cleaning Charles' head wound, she was going on and on about Uncle Ken. I knew she didn't like him, even though I thought he was great. "That Ken, he's so irresponsible," she said. "He should have been looking after you, Charles. He should be restraining his chickens more responsibly, and this wouldn't have happened. I'm going to get him on the phone and let him know that he needs to do something about it," she riled. I heard Mum dialing my uncle's number from the hall phone. "Ken, it's Joan here. Charles has just come home from your farm and he has been pecked by your rooster. I can't believe you haven't been more responsible with your chickens." Ken answered something back and then Joan slammed down the phone. That didn't go well, I thought. Mum said in an angry voice to no one in particular, "Well, I never. Ken just told me not to ring him next time. He told me that if it happens again, I should ring up the rooster." That's the end of the story. Thanks for listening. Go to my YouTube channel to hear more stories or read them in my latest novel, 4 Ways to Die at Riverside Towers. It's available from Amazon. Until next time, have a great day today and every day.